Okay, well, then without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. We have Stephanie York, who is the Vice President of Hennes Communications, and she is going to talk to us today about crisis management. So, Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Am I on? Can you hear me?
We can hear you and see your screen.
Perfect, perfect. So I'm just going to jump right in. So there are 110 reasons why some reporter might stick a microphone in your face and ask you about something you don't want to talk about or something you don't know anything about. For example, an employee files a sexual harassment or a discrimination suit. There's a deadly accident at the county fair, a death of an employee or executive, allegations of fiscal mismanagement, equipment failure, chemical spill, explosion, a COVID outbreak, zoning issues, thefts, and the list goes on and on. Well, when the media descends upon you, don't let this happen to you.
Councilman, when you did become aware of the mistake, why didn't you try to change it? Why didn't you try to correct it?
Because I was unaware of it.
I'm saying, when you became aware of it...
Wait a minute now, let's stop it. Don't put me to the third degree on it. I told you what the damn mistake was. Now don't put me through a third degree on it. I don't have to answer that to you.
When you became aware...
I told you, goddammit, now get out of my way.
When you became aware...
Put that camera out,
When you became aware of the mistake, Councilman...
Hey, Councilman, what are you doing? Question about a patient. Dr. McCluskey, please. What are you running from?
Let's put that on the 6 o'clock news. This reporter is a jerk, and he screws people's lives up.
You don't mind if I talk to your
No,
receptionist?
yes, I do.
Why? I want to answer...
I want that film right now.
Easy, easy. Hey. Hey, my coat's in there, Mr. Guilford.
Do you have naked women on the golf course?
No.
It was during a follow-up interview that Forlani asked me to leave the clubhouse, but not before he threatened my family.
Is there anything else you want to say about this, Sal?
Nope, not at all.
Okay. Well, all right.
But if your kid does play on that football team, I'm going to make sure my kid
What's that?
If your kid plays on that football team, I want to make sure my kid goes one-on-one with them. We'll see what happens.
What's life been like for you since you admitted you were a crook 20 months ago? Federal prosecutors say you acted like the Godfather and ran a criminal enterprise out of the county building.
Tom, I have no comment, Tom.
Well, when municipalities, other government agencies, law firms, corporations, hospitals, universities, public and private schools, small nonprofits across the country, large nonprofits, when entities get attacked by the media, they call for someone like me. I am a crisis communication specialist. I'm not a PR guy, and let me tell you the difference. PR people are in the education business, educating a group of people over a period of time to get them to buy more widgets, to increase their market share. PR people bring more attention to your brand. And the last thing you want when you're in the middle of a crisis is more attention. And the methodologies we use at Hennes are very counterintuitive to the traditional practices of public relations. In fact, our elevator speeches, we make your story better, we make your story shorter, we make your story go away. In fact, the best stories I have, I just can't tell you because we've literally made them go away. It is a simple fact that legal controversies today are tried in the court of public opinion as often, if not more, than the court of law. It is also a fact that the greatest uninsured asset of your company is its reputation. Let me repeat that. Your greatest uninsured asset is your reputation. Think about it. We insure the furniture that your employees sit on, the buildings that they work in, and even the health of your employees. But we don't insure against a reputational attack. And because so many of the previous situations I mentioned are settled prior to trial, I would suggest that managing the court of public opinion is more important. So with all that as a backdrop, and to help you control the court of public opinion, I am going to explain to you something we call the damage control playbook. I'm going to teach it to you. You're going to learn it in the next 40 minutes, and it has just 6 simple concepts. If you learn the first 3, you'll be very, very good crisis communication specialist. If you learn all 6, you can do my job. Not that you'd want it, trust me. It's a lot of stress, a lot of crisis. So let's learn these. Rule number 1, tell the truth. Tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth. Why? Because the truth always comes out. It may not come out today. It may not come out tomorrow. It may not come out for 3 years when that court suit's done. But if it comes out and they find out you've lied, you've damaged your and your company's reputation going forward as well as going backwards. And the corollary to that is don't deny the obvious. Any attempt to deny the obvious just digs the press, makes the press dig for more. If they have this much of the story, they're going to get the rest of the story, and you're not smart enough to spin your way out of that. Number 2, tell it first. The person who tells the story first determines the trajectory of the story. And number 3, tell it all. Tell everything you're legally, morally, and ethically able to tell. Because if you're not telling it all, someone else is telling their version of all, which may or may not be true. And again, all you're doing is playing catch up. I'm going to give you an example of how tell the truth, tell it first, tell it all, how this works. I get a call from the law director of a small city just outside of Cleveland. Says, you got to get out here right away. So I went out there. Law director tells me it's a big HR problem. And so I asked what I always ask, what do you want us to do? And he said, I want to make sure this doesn't end up on the front page of our paper, which is the Cleveland Plain Dealer at the time. I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have the reporter come in that covers your city, because there's always one that covers each municipality. Have the reporter come in. We're going to give them the entire story. We're going to give them the personnel file of the person that did something wrong that you're going to fire. We'll redact what we need to redact, social security numbers, personal information, things like that. But we're going to give them the story. And that law director looked at me like I was crazy. He said, what? And I repeated myself. He says, I can't do that. He goes, that goes against everything I learned in law school. In law school, we were taught you don't give bad news until it's discovered, until you ask the right questions in the court case and you're forced to give the answer. I said, well, you were schooled in the court of law. I was schooled in the court of public opinion. If we do it your way, I guarantee we will be on the front page of the Plain Dealer. If you do it my way, the worst thing that happens is we're on the front page of the paper. The best thing that happens is we're not in there at all. He said, all right, I'm nervous, but I'll give it a try. Called the reporter in, gave him the story. Next day I went out to the paper, looked at section A1, A2, A3, nothing on the front page. B1, local section, B2, B3, nothing in the local section. Went out day 2, nothing in the paper. Day 3, day 4, day 5, day 6, day 7, day 8, day 9 it showed up. It showed up all right. It was on B11, bottom of the fold, in 3 tiny paragraphs. And every time I tell this story, even in that city, nobody knows what I'm talking about, because we told the truth, we told it all, we told it first. If you just think about the way reporters, the way they think, if it's not leaked to them by an angry ex-employee, if it's not given to them by a disgruntled PTA mom, if they don't have to dig it out themselves or do public records requests and pull teeth to get the information, it doesn't seem to be quite as important to them. Now, similar story, completely different outcome. I get a call from a large nonprofit agency. The executive director calls me out, wants me to come down. Of course, they all want me to come down right away. I stayed on the phone this time. I said, what's going on? He says, well, I have 2 employees that embezzled over $1 million. I said, wow, that's a big story. He says, I know. I said, what do you want me to do? He goes, I want to make sure that the news never finds out about it. I said, okay. How many people in your organization know? He goes, oh, about 23. I said, 23 people? We're not going to keep this off the news. Keep it out of the news. It's probably already on its way there, right? I said, here's what we're going to do. I gave him similar advice. I said, we're going to pick the reporter we know and trust, because I'll take fair over slanted any day of the week. We're going to call that reporter in. We're going to give that reporter, the story, the same thing, the personnel files, redact what we need to redact and all that. And that executive director said, I can't do that. I'm going to look stupid. I said, well, how are you going to look when the investigative reporter's standing on your front porch saying your tax dollars squandered, news at 11? I said, you're going to look horrible. He's like, all right, I'll give it a try. So called the reporter and gave him the story. Next day I go out to the paper, and this is a completely different story, right? Completely different. It was top of the fold, huge headline, just slightly smaller than Man Walks on Moon. I mean, it was big, but it was a great headline. It says, agency discovers loss, takes action. It was a good headline. It was a good story. This stuff works. Tell the truth, tell it first, tell it all. Rule number 4, tell it fast. Now, the internet has changed everything, right? Especially the relationship between TV news reporters and newspaper and print reporters. I mean, after all, about 5-7 years ago, who used to break news? Well, TV did, because if it was in the paper, when did it happen? By definition, it happened yesterday, right? But nowadays, reporters are told, you don't leave that meeting until you tweet something. You don't leave that town hall discussion until you put something up on Facebook. If it's wrong, I'll fix it later, right? And they're not just competing with other reporters who are there covering the story. They're competing with their own employees and the public who whip out their cell phones at a moment's notice to take pictures and to tweet things, right? And this has given rise to something we call iterative journalism. It's the biggest thing in journalism you've never heard of. And this is the way it works. Say there's 3 people part of my story. Back in the old days, way back like 7 years ago, I would call 3 people up and I would wait all day for them to call me back. If they didn't call me back, I'd go to their office and park myself outside their office and wait to catch them as they come into work. If I couldn't catch them that way, I'd go to their house. But I couldn't write that story till I got their voices in that story, because if I took it to my editor, he'd say, what's this? Get back out there. Go get me facts. Go get someone to talk. Nowadays, I call 3 people up. You got 10 minutes to call me back, right? If you don't call me back, I'm posting something up on our sites. I'm posting the story. So the first person sees the story and says, oh my gosh, that's wrong. Calls me up and says, hey, you got this wrong, this wrong, this wrong. I'm happy to change the story. It has a new iteration. And then the second person calls me up and says, hey, you let so-and-so talk about the story, but I didn't get to give our company's side perspective. I'm like, I'm happy to put it in there. Tell me what you got. I write it into the story. It has a new iteration. And then the third person, who's been in meetings all day long, not their fault. They're busy, right? They see the story at the end of the day and they're not in it. And they're in trouble, right? Because their boss wants the company in the story. So they call me up. Well, I got to tell you, if you're calling me up at the end of the day, you've got a problem, because from the morning when I posted it to the end of the day, that story could have 4, 5, 6 or more iterations. And the problem with that is, where do people read their news these days? They read them on their cell phones. And let me ask you, how often do you read a story? Do you go back and reread it later? Never, unless you're in the story and then you're kind of obsessive with it. But if you're not in the story, you read the story once and you move on. So you may not hear the 4th or 5th iteration. If you're at the end of the day, nobody's going to hear what you have to say. So if I suggest if you're at the end of the day and you have a lot to tell that reporter, call the reporter up and tell them, I have more to that story, but I want a new headline. I want a new story. It starts that process all over again. They're likely to do it. They get paid by the story. They get paid by the hit, by the click. So they're likely to write that new story. So where is the court of public opinion first convened these days? Of course, it's on social media, right? Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So when a crisis hits, you need to be prepared for the first round of social media. A May 2019 Pew study reported that 67% of US adults get their news on social media. 67% get their news on social media. They don't go to NBC, they don't go to ABC, they go to social media, they go to Twitter, they go to Facebook, they go to to Snapchat to get their news. In breaking news situations, Twitter is the go-to news outlet. A couple of years ago, we first learned of the shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando on Twitter, and it was reported not by reporters, but by the people who were there as it happened. This was the first tweet about the shooting. Oh my God, shooting at Pulse, we hid in the bathroom and we can't find our friends. And then the owners of Pulse went straight to Twitter. Everyone, get out of Pulse and keep running. And then the Orlando police went to Twitter to keep people updated. Orlando police, Pulse shooting, the shooter inside the club is dead. Think about that for a moment. The Orlando police communicated the biggest news likely in its department's history first on Twitter. And of course, that's where our president lives. That's where politicians live these days. Our previous president was always on Twitter, right? Until he wasn't. But now that's where President Biden is. Social media is arguably the most powerful tool we have in our toolbox for distributing and receiving information during an ongoing crisis. And there are some overall approaches that can be applied to just about every media interaction, especially social media. So here's some guiding principles. I have a whole seminar on social media that goes about an hour, but I'm only going to give you the overarching rules on social media because that's all we have time for today. But if you want that other seminar, let me know. So, guiding principles. Be transparent. Online audiences expect open communication. They will see through any attempt to hide or cover up the facts. Trying to be anything other than fully transparent will erode the trust you have built in your stakeholders. Be responsive. Listen, online communication is a two-way street. When stakeholders address you with concerns and questions through your official social media sites or accounts, they will expect timely responses, right? And be fast. The speed of communication is essential. Social media sites such as Twitter thrive on real-time communication. They've turned what used to be a 24-hour news cycle, something happens, you read about it the next day, into a 24-second news cycle. It's scary out there, folks. It's therefore really important to be as timely as possible with all communications. If you don't drive the conversation around an issue or a crisis, someone else will. And again, what they're saying may or may not be true. Couple your words with action. Your online constituents will only be motivated to support you if they see your organization is following through and has a track record of following through on its promises. So, for example, if you offer to address a situation, look into a problem that they're having, that they're complaining about on Facebook, make sure your organization is prepared to act on it and get back to that person on Facebook and let them know that you would like to talk with them, you'd like to reach out to you and work on it. You're not just talking to that person, everyone else is watching you interact. Be professional and be human. I mean, social media is, after all, about being social. So that means using language that incorporates compassion, understanding, gratitude, respect, and even remorse if appropriate. Corporate speak and legalese does not win friends and supporters online. Do not let your attorney, and I'm an attorney, so I rag on attorneys a lot. Do not let your attorney draft your social media tweets and your social media posts. Nobody wants to hear from your attorney. They want to hear real people saying real things. Not that attorneys aren't real people, but they kind of have their own language, right? And nobody wants to hear that on social media. They want you to be social. Here's one of my favorite examples of being professional, yet being very, very human. A Red Cross social media specialist thought she was tweeting a friend. This tweet went out to the entire Red Cross Twitter feed. Ryan found 2 more 4-bottle packs of dog, fish, heads, Midas Touch beer. When we drink, we do it right. # getting slizzard. That tweet was up for about an hour when the Red Cross social media director was alerted to it. She immediately took down the tweet, but she didn't stop there. She did apologize on Twitter, but she didn't stop there. She then impressively thinking, and very quickly, I might add, put this up. We've deleted the rogue tweet, but rest assured the Red Cross is sober and we've confiscated the keys. It's a great response. It was a human response. They made fun of themselves. This was a self-inflicted wound, right? The final result. Dogfish Head Beer staged a fundraiser for Red Cross. Red Cross was praised for its response, and the traffic to the Red Cross site actually increased after this mishap. Another example, this happened a couple years ago also, but it's just a classic. It happened in London, in the UK. Kentucky Fried Chicken outlets in the UK had the lovely experience of running out of chicken. They had a new delivery provider and logistics got screwed up, and most of KFC's 900 locations were temporarily shut down. 900 KFCs had to close. This was a crisis for KFC, no doubt. But where did people who wanted Kentucky Fried Chicken go to voice their complaints? Yeah, they went to social media. They went to Twitter, which prompted the Manchester police to get involved. And they put up this tweet. Please do not contact us about the hashtag KFC crisis. It is not a police matter if your favorite eatery is not serving the menu you desire. What did KFC do? Well, they did this. Yes, they did. And they did it with a well done full page ad in the paper apology, which said, we're sorry. It's so simple to say we're sorry. We're sorry. A chicken restaurant without any chicken. It's not ideal. Huge apologies to our customers, especially those who traveled out of their way to find we were closed. And endless thanks to our KFC team members and our franchise partners for working tirelessly to improve the situation. It's been a hell of a week, but we're making progress, and every day more and more fresh chicken is being delivered to our restaurants. Thank you for bearing with us. Now, I realize you may not be quite that bold, right? And I'm not trying to get anyone fired. The point is that social media has to be social. It has to be human to work. Trust me, no lawyer approved that other slide to go up on Twitter, right? It has to be human. But when it is human, and when you can be a little funny and make fun of yourself, it can really work to deflect criticism and end a crisis. With that said, there are best practices on social media, and we'll go through those as well. And then we'll go back to the damage control playbook. Best practices. Monitor and be prepared to respond. Listen, we're in a 24/7 news environment. If you are posting on social media, you need to be monitoring on social media. Now, I know some of you are not big enough. You simply can't have somebody watching social media all the time. If you check it once a day, once every other day, let people know our page is monitored every other day. We will get back to you if you have a question or concerns, but make sure you do that, okay? Don't let mistakes live on. You need to correct and respond to misinformation as quickly as you can. You cannot allow misstatements of fact or incorrect characterizations of your organization to go unchallenged. Correct the error in a straightforward, professional way, but make sure it's an error of fact. If it's someone's opinion, you need to let it stand. Someone will come to your rescue, I promise you, right? Someone will say, no, that's not true. They're not a sucky company. If it's just an opinion, you got to let that opinion stand. But if it is a misstatement of fact, you need to correct the fact, but correct the errors once. Which brings me to my next point. Do not arm wrestle with trolls. We know who they are. Resist the urge to get caught up in exchanges with rude or obnoxious people on social media. Respond to correct errors, but don't feel compelled to continue the conversation should that person then challenge your response. Pause before hitting delete. Now, if there's any government agencies out there or public entities, you cannot delete social media posts. You just can't. They're public records. You might be able to hide them under certain circumstances. Check with your attorney. But for everyone else, resist the urge to delete negative postings to your official social media sites unless they are offensive. And I mean, there you have racial undertones. There are overtly racist, profane, personal attacks on people, things like that. And if you remove a comment, explain why. This is Stephanie York, Director of Communications for XYZ Company. We removed the previous post because it contained racist comments or contained a personal attack. Please be kind to one another. Something like that. Because if you don't explain why you took it off and something just disappears, I guarantee the person that posted it has already taken a screenshot of that and will just keep reposting it and saying, oh, you can't say anything bad on their page. They'll just remove it, right? And then that becomes the story. Go offline to get back on track. Listen, you don't have to discuss everything openly on social media. Offer to contact a person that has a problem with your company or has an issue offline to resolve the issue as appropriate. Say, this is Stephanie York, Director of Communications. Could you please contact, send me a direct message, a DM, or send me your, send me your phone number, or here's my work email. Send me a message with your contact information. I'd like to discuss this with you. Maybe I can help. And then follow through. Sometimes if you can resolve the issue, sometimes they just need someone to complain to, like no one would listen to them. If you can resolve their issue, they'll go back on social media and take down their own post. That was critical. Know who's running the site. If seriously incorrect information appears on a news outlet's comment board or social media site, consider contacting the publication's online content manager. They usually will have either an online editor, a director of digital operations, or a director of community engagement, something like that. Request help in having the comment removed. They don't want misinformation on their page any more than you do. And finally, remember your audience. You are not talking to that one troll, to that one person that is hounding you and giving you grief. You're talking to everybody else that's watching what's going on and seeing how you respond and how you handle yourself on social media. Listen, social media is not going away. It's not going to get less important as time goes on. So I do suggest that you embrace social media and just remember the social media best practices and guidelines when you decide whether you're going to answer or not answer somebody on social media. Okay, rule number 5, we're moving right along. Tell it to the people who matter most. This is probably, besides tell the truth, tell it all, tell it first. This is really high up there. Listen, when you're dealing with conventional media, TV and newspapers, you're dealing with mass media, and mass media is good. You get to talk to a lot of people all at once. The problem with mass media is the media filters. And what do I mean by that? Well, you filter something, when you filter it, you change the way it tastes, the way it looks, the way it feels. For example, a reporter comes out, the filtering begins. Say I'm the reporter. I come out to do an interview. What did I have for breakfast? Did I even eat breakfast? Did I have a good night's sleep? Did I argue with my spouse? Where did I go to school? That's all part of the filtering process. And then I start asking you a question. What goes into my notes? What doesn't go into my notes? Then I take that back to my office. What goes into my story from my notes? What gets left on the cutting room floor, right? And then I take that story and I give it to an editor. Where did that editor go to school? Does he think, well, you talked to the, the head guy in Northeast Ohio, but did you call the guy in Washington and get his perspective? And then the editor starts to wordsmith. And come on, all you writers out there, if you change a comma in a sentence, you change the whole thrust of that sentence potentially. And then a headline's written. Little known fact, reporters typically don't write their own headlines. There are people called headline writers. Listen, it's a job. It's a very important job. How do you take this really long article and parse it down into 3, 4, 5 words? It's not easy to do, right? And sometimes they don't get it quite right. Do you ever notice there's a fundamental disconnect between the headline and the story? You read the headline and you think you know what's going to happen or what the story's about, but then you get into the story and you're like, wow, that's not what I thought this was going to be about. Well, if that happens to your company, you've got a problem, because most people do not read the paper from one end to the other or the internet from one end to the other as if it's possible. What they do is they browse headlines and they read stories that involve them or their company or something they're very interested in, right? So if they're only reading the headlines and the headline is misleading about your company, you could have a potential issue. So all this filtering, why am I telling you about all this filtering? Well, I'm telling you because when we're called into a sudden crisis situation, the first thing we're thinking about is how do we get your side of the story out to your stakeholders, your key audiences, fast without being filtered at all. Well, first of all, you could take live TV. Live TV, I know it sounds terrible, right? Like horrifying. Oh, I don't want to be on live TV. But for 10 to 12 seconds, you can say whatever you want. Whatever you want. So it doesn't sound like a lot of time, but you can get 3 or 4 really good messages out in 12 seconds, especially if you talk fast like me. But chances are you're not going to get the opportunity to go on live TV because there simply don't have enough people to send out to every story with a live camera. Or they're going to come out to do what to you, and you don't want that kind of story. So then we think, how do we go around the media filter and talk directly to your stakeholders? Well, I'm going to answer that question, but I'm going to back up one more time. Let's talk about your stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? Let's take a high school, for example. Most of us are familiar with a high school. We've gone to high school. We have kids in high school or grandkids in high school, right? So in a high school, if you have an incident, you have a crisis, who do you have to notify about this? Well, your stakeholders are your teachers, your students, your parents, administration, front office staff, custodians, vendors to the school, people that live within a 1-mile radius of the school, if you got an active shooter or something like that, local, state, and federal regulators, and the list goes on. And for every organization, I don't care how big or how small you are, every organization has between 10 and 20 distinct stakeholders. So we think, how do you go around the media filter and talk directly to those people? Well, personal meetings. You can have your staff come in and talk to them, tell them what's going on. You can do phone calls, call your board members up, call your most important donors, call your customers. You could have a town hall meeting. You could have old-fashioned letters. If it's a crisis, but it's something that doesn't need to get out today or tomorrow, you can send a letter to all your customers explaining what happened, right? Email. Email is a great way to get to your stakeholders quickly with your message. And of course, digital communications, especially social media. People who care most about you and your organization will go to your website if you have a crisis or something going on to see what's going on, to see if you've posted anything. They will go to your Facebook page. They will follow your Twitter feed. And what we find is if we get your words to your stakeholders and fast, they may not believe what they read on the blogs at 3 p.m., what they see on the news at 6, or what they read in the paper the next morning. It doesn't take much to discredit the media without even throwing a punch. You just have to get the information to your stakeholders fast before the media tells their side of the story, right? Rule number 6. Rule number 6. The media's job is to tell stories. I hate to tell you this part. It is not the media's job to inform or educate. And I hate to tell you that because it goes against everything you learned in high school civics class. You were told reporters are supposed to report the facts. They gather the facts you've seen with your own eyes, you've heard with your own ears. You may have even said with your own mouth, right? And they take those facts and they plop them down right into the paper. Wrong. If they did that, that's called a report, and nobody wants to read a report with their bagel and coffee at 6:30 in the morning, right? The fundamental job of a reporter is to tell stories. And how do they do that? Well, they take the facts you gave them, the facts you know to be true, that you've seen, right? And they throw some out. And then they gather more facts that may be true or may not be true. And they put them in the mix. And then they rearrange the order in a way that may or may not make sense. And they take what's left and they shake them up and they jam them in what we call story frameworks. These stories have names and they have characters that inhabit each framework. For example, if you see a military or a sports story, it's told in the hero framework. You know, how someone went off to war and came back, and this is a hero story, right? Sports, the person that got hurt, injured in sports, and now they're in the Olympics, you know, they overcome all these things. That's a hero, right? The good mother, the good parent that becomes a bad parent, the rich man that becomes a poor man, business stories, features, you can't bring that product to market, and they bring it to market, it makes $1 gazillion. Reporters love to write them, people love to read them. Stories of triumph, stories of honor, stories of dishonor, overcoming the odds. There's stories of redemption and stories of conflict. Horse race stories. They have no horses, but what they have are winners and losers, right? That's how political stories are told. Who's up in Michigan, who's down in Iowa, who's winning in Ohio. That's all we heard for the last year were these horse race stories. Who's up, who's down, who's winning. But what you're going to get hit with, when someone points the finger at you and says, you should have known that your driver had previous DUIs. You should have known that that finance person that you hired was fired from his previous job under suspicious circumstances. You should have known that that product could hurt little kids. What you're going to get hit with when you point that finger is what we have called the 3V framework. It's the villain who did something to the victim and the vindicator that rides to the rescue. Now, vindicators, they come in all shapes and sizes. It could be the angry PTA mom. It could be the disgruntled employee. It could be the news reporter digging up all these facts, right? But the problem with the real 3V with the 3V framework, that's hard to say, is twofold. It is triggered the second the accusation is made that you should have known, whether you heard it or not. And the second it's triggered, the only thing matters is the speed of your response. It's a terrible conundrum, terrible situation to be in. I'll give you an example of this, how this occurs. Your secretary or office personnel, your office personnel gets a call at 8 a.m. It's the New York Times calling about allegations of sexual harassment at your organization. The reporter leaves a message. You retrieve the office manager retrieves it about half hour later after they have coffee. They're, said hi to everyone, welcomed everyone, gets the message and says, sends it up to her manager, right? Manager gets it and listens to the message and says, oh my gosh, and sends it to their boss, right? And it goes up and up until it hits the main boss. So it's about 11 o'clock already. Boss gets it, hears the message and says, oh no, we better call our, guess who? Our attorney, right? Because attorneys always get involved. We have superpowers, right? Call the attorney. Attorney's in a meeting, leaves a message. Attorney goes to lunch, has a lunch meeting, has another meeting after. Excuse me. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Gets the call about 1 p.m. Listens to the call, calls the boss back and says, okay, don't call that reporter back. We have to figure out what's going on, right? Now that makes sense. You don't want to cold call the reporter back, especially a New York Times reporter. So they figure out with the HR person what's going on. They know what it's about. Then the lawyer says, you don't call the reporter back, I will call the reporter back. Let me tell you, no matter how many degrees from Harvard, Columbus, OSU, Akron University, this lawyer has, that lawyer is about to drive the truck off the cliff. And let me tell you why. That call was made at 8 a.m. to your office. It's now being returned at 4 p.m. by an attorney. That reporter now knows he has a story. And it just makes him hang on tighter and dig deeper. And then the attorney makes things worse by saying things like, no comment. Or this is a matter under litigation, no comment, right? Well, what do you think of? Think about it. I mean, come on, what does everybody think of when you hear no comment? Guilty, 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 right? Listen, there may be things you can't talk about. There are privacy considerations with personnel issues. There's HIPAA concerns if it's a medical issue. There are legitimate legal concerns, so yes, confer with your attorney. But remember, there is always something you can say. Listen, I cannot talk about that specific allegation of sexual discrimination. But what I can tell you is when we get allegations of that nature, this is the process our organization takes. Listen, you've answered the question. You got a good quote in the paper. You didn't say anything about that case that would harm that case. It's too early to talk about that, but what I can tell you is this. There are always something you can say, but no comment cannot be an option. And it's much the same on social media. If you're on Facebook, Twitter, and there's a news story and some person or organization is being vilified on social media, don't you wonder where they are? Why they aren't standing up for themselves and saying, hey, that's not true? Right, at least you're allowing everyone else to define your role in this situation and perhaps forever cement how people will remember you and your organization. So silence is not golden when dealing with a crisis. Meanwhile, it's on the blogs, it's on the TV news, it's in newspapers, it's on the internet that you are the villain. Listen, you never want to be the villain, but they're saying you're the villain. Let's assume you're not the villain. Maybe you're the vindicator. Maybe you're even the victim in the case. The real insidious problem with the 3V framework, and it is when the facts don't fit the frame, the facts are discarded. In other words, once everybody already believes you're the villain, all you do is reinforce the role they want you to play. It's not a good situation, which is why you have to respond quickly and get your side of the story out. And you can't just talk your way out of the villain role. What do villains do? They don't return calls timely or at all. A lot of times they'll get a call from the media, they just won't call them back. They don't make eye contact. They speak through their spokespersons or lawyers at inappropriate times, and they don't know how to say, I'm sorry. What do vindicators do? They do return calls, they make eye contact, they speak for themselves, and they know how to say I'm sorry without taking legal responsibility. Listen, you can be really sorry that somebody got hurt, but it doesn't have to be your fault that they got hurt. So I'm often asked, this is a big one, what do you do if you are the villain, right? Right? Bad things happen to good organizations. You hire the wrong guy, he makes a mistake. People make mistakes, but you hire the wrong guy and he does something terrible. He steals from you. You can't anticipate that. Or someone just makes a mistake and people got hurt. I mean, bad things happen to good organizations. Well, I told you the 3 V's, and now I'm going to tell you the 3 F's. Well, I can't say the first F because I promise this is being recorded and I don't want that on here. So I'll paraphrase. If you F up, fess up, and fix up. In other words, admit what happened and pivot immediately over to what you're going to do so it doesn't happen again. Right? You immediately go from being the villain to being the vindicator in the same news story. You're not going to like the first 2 paragraphs the reporter writes. That's everything, you guys did wrong, but you force the reporter to write what you're going to do so it doesn't happen again. And if you don't know exactly what you're going to do yet, that's okay. Say, look, we know we need to fix this problem and we're going to fix it. We're not going to bring that product back until it's fixed, until it's safe. Or we fire that guy and, we're going to figure out what happens. We don't want this ever to happen again, but we need to figure out what exactly happened. There's always something you can say. Bottom line is most reporters today are serving 2 masters. I do believe they want to get the truth, but I do think they want to be first. They want to be the first out with the news. And if you don't decide what character you want to play in the story and get out first and embrace it, the media will assign that character to you. Now, remember that first video I showed you about how not to behave when a reporter tries to ambush you? Well, I can't leave you hanging. I have to show you what you can do in order to talk to that reporter and get a good get a good story out of it. My colleague who works at Hennes put this video together. He used to work for Channel 3 News. So let's get entertained by him for a minute. Here's what you should do.
It's happened to me, and it's happened to just about every PR person on the face of the earth. Your client comes up to you and asks, how can you guarantee that I can get on TV? Well, I managed TV newsrooms for 20 years, and here are a few techniques that I've seen work every time. You can run away from the reporter as fast as you can. Grab the videographer's camera and wrestle with it. You could jump in your car and floor it. You could slam the door in the reporter's face. We usually see this kind of behavior when people are ambushed by a TV reporter. I can tell you that nothing made me more gleeful in a newsroom than a reporter skipping into the newsroom with an ear-to-ear grin telling me, you got to see this one. And then they play back video of them chasing some poor sap into a building or around a car. Usually the whole newsroom winds up gathering around to watch. So guess what video is edited into each and every promotional spot that day? And guess what video is edited into each and every follow-up story that gets done? It just doesn't have to be this way. The best way to handle an ambush interview, don't give the reporter anything they can use. If you're getting in your car and suddenly a microphone is stuck in your face and a red-faced reporter is shouting provocative questions at you, take a deep breath and as politely and calmly as you can, get out of your car and say, I will be glad to talk about this. I can't do it right now, but I can meet you in 15 minutes. And if the reporter insists, repeat it again. Is that exciting TV? Of course not. The reporter probably won't use it in their story. So keep your cool. Buy yourself a little time to prepare. Do the interview in a neutral location. If you try it, you may turn an ambush interview into an opportunity for you to deliver meaningful messages.
So I am going to stop here and I'm going to tell you quickly about our free email newsletter. It's called Crisis Management Today. It goes best practice link. If you like what you heard here today, you'll get stories, things we liked that people did right in the last couple weeks, things that we didn't like that they could have done better, and these are high profile stories. You would have read about them, you would know about them. You'll be like, oh yeah, gosh, I can't believe they did do that. Here's what they should have done, things like that. Really practical tools. I think you'll like it. What you need to do is send an email to hennes@crisiscommunications.com and just type subscribe in the subject line. We don't do anything else with your emails, trust me. We're not that sophisticated with emails. It's easy to unsubscribe if you don't like it, but I think you will really like the newsletter. So sign up for that and I will take questions. I think we have
Stephanie, I think you accidentally muted yourself.
I did. I'm just trying to figure out how to, I can't get you big. There you are.
There we are.
Yay. Okay. So I don't know if anybody, no, it doesn't look like there's any questions in the chat or anything like that, but if anybody wants to yell out a question, if not, we can be done early.
I have one quick question, kind of in the current climate, especially when we look at politics. Just at the federal level, even some at the local level. And the court of public opinion, in my opinion, is growing. Do you see that, are you predicting a massive uptick in your line of work?
Oh, we totally have a massive uptick in our line of work. And most of it is stemming from social media. For example, the previous president would like to call out brands, Goodyear, for example, or other brands. We have brands calling us afraid that they're going to be called out because they have, an operation in China, or they have this, and they, or it's just part of the political, scene. And they want to be prepared for if they're called out by a politician. It may not be that grand of a scale for you guys, but if you have local politicians, local things going on, it could be zoning issues, things like that, that will get clients calling us saying, hey, this is going before the planning commission, we want to be prepared. We do media training, we do presentation training, we help with bullet points, things like that. Social media, we find there'll be a lot of critical comments about companies, entities, and typically nobody pays mind to it until it's, starts getting legs. If it was a meeting or a terrible comment someone made, or they posted a sign that was inappropriate, who knows? I mean, we've seen it all. It becomes viral, truly, and they need to know how to stop that. And sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Sometimes we say, let it ride. The next story will be around the corner. And sometimes we say, you need to address this, because every time someone Googles it, that's the first thing they're going to see about your company, that your president was a racist, whatever, whatever it is. So, we analyze it and help with that. But we do see with people being so brazen on social media. I mean, there's totally different than when you're talking to them in person, right? They go behind their screen, and for some reason they feel they can say whatever they want to say. And it really does create havoc for companies and entities, especially the disgruntled employee that starts posting things about a company. I work there. I know they don't do these health measures. I know they don't wash their hands before they, whatever it is. I mean, that's a problem. It needs to be, addressed quickly with your constituents. And it may not be that you post something, you may need to post something, but you may want to go directly to your customers and talk to them, saying, hey, you may have seen or heard this, but we want you to know the facts, and just tell them straight up what's going on. So I hope that answered your question. It was a very long answer for a very short question.
I asked a question I kind of knew the answer to, that yes, I'm sure you are seeing a massive
we're seeing
uptick,
a lot.
so.
Yeah, we don't handle politics much, because it's usually he said, she said, and it's just not our we don't take sides, nothing like that. But if it is hurting a company or a brand, we try to help them with their reputation repair and keep their reputation intact. But we don't do the, I don't know.
The political minefield.
Correct.
Yes, I'll say it for you.
Typically we don't. So.
Are there any other questions for Stephanie?
Well, thank you all.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephanie. I thought it was excellent. We will have a video. I will upload it to YouTube. So we'll have a link that we will share. And Stephanie, I'll send that to you as well.
Thank you.
All right. We got a thumbs up from Mandy.
Thank you, Mandy.
Make sure that gets sent out. Because I know there are sections of this that I will probably go back and rewatch and be sharing with some others as well. Just make sure that you tune in next month. Our topic next month is job site safety with Tony I can't say his last name. Sorry. He goes by Tony D. We've had him as a speaker before last year. He is the CEO and co-founder of Ving, and he does an excellent job. He will be hosting job site safety in March, and then in April, a partner of his is going to be on women in safety. So we have a couple good ones coming up over the next 2 months. If you have any questions, you need anything from me, don't hesitate to reach out, send me an email. And with that, thank you again, Stephanie.
Sure.
Everybody.
My pleasure.
Stay warm, stay safe, and have a fabulous day.
Bye.
Thank you. It was very good. Appreciate it.
Great. Have a good day.
Bye.